I grew up in Singapore, and I went to boarding school in England. And when I was in school in England, I learned to fly, and it was a real revelation. I didn't think I was good at many things. Flying, I guess I was reasonably good at, and I got my private license when I was 18. It was a British license. I finished high school, and in Singapore there was compulsory military service. So I started in the Singapore Navy as a midshipman, and then eventually, for various reasons, I transferred to the Air Force. And it wasn't just compulsory military service; it was a regular commission. I started flying on the undergraduate pilot training course in the Aermacchi SF-260. At the time when I went into pilot training, I had about 100 hours on 150s and 172s. And they put me in this Marchetti. And it's like learning to fly on maybe learning to drive in a compact. And then they put you in one of these. So that airplane spoiled me for life. I have never owned a 150. I've never owned a 172. The Marchetti I have is my first airplane, the first airplane I owned. Military flight training, I did about 120 hours on the Marchetti. And then I went to the basic jet phase, which was on the British Aerospace Strike Master. And I did 140 hours on that. And then operationally, I flew helicopters, Bell 212, search and rescue, Bell UH-1, H models, B models. England is obviously a very small country, and there are a lot of airspace restrictions, a lot of controlled airspace. I guess the equivalents of Class Cs. British system is also very interesting. I don't know whether they still do it. I haven't flown there for years. But they have this thing where you can actually fly IMC if you have an instrument rating. You can fly on instruments, I think, without an instrument flight plan, which I find very strange. Other than that, the training syllabus, the biggest difference, I guess, in the private training syllabus was in England, you had to do spins. You probably didn't need to, I think, demonstrate it, I think, during the check ride, but certainly, as part of the syllabus, you had to be taught spin entry and recovery. Other than that, I guess it was a fairly conventional sort of flight training. I actually flew Cessna 150Fs, the 1966 model. And I went to a boarding school in Cambridge, and the local airport was a very famous organization called Marshals of Cambridge. They still are a big aerospace firm, and what they did over there at the time, and they still do now, were modifications on C-130s. I think the Royal Air Force had just had the C-130s in service for a few years, and there was a particular weather reconnaissance modification they built, which I think was retired a few years ago. The interesting thing was that the Aero Club, where I learned to fly, the Civilian General Aviation Aero Club, was part of the whole organization. But the instructors were all test pilots. They flew C-130s, TriStars, and the rest of it. And then I think part of the job description was they had to teach in the Aero Club. And I learned to fly at the time where the World War II generation was just still in its prime, but about to leave. My instructor, probably in his 50s, had flown Lancasters in combat during World War II. And the Czech airmen, who also worked for the company, flew Mosquito Intruders. So these were really qualified and experienced guys. I think the historical perspective is quite important. It has to do with heritage and the rest of it. Most of us who fly, especially, I guess, if you fly for the whole of your adult life, it kind of becomes part of you. And it's not just the science and the mechanics and the nuts and bolts of the thing, but I think it's very important to know where you came from. When I learned to fly helicopters, that Air Force was very small. So the helicopter conversion was done at squadron level. They didn't have a specialized operational conversion unit or anything. You essentially, everybody finished fixed wing training. If you washed out, you washed out, you didn't go anywhere else. And the helicopter conversion was done at squadron level. And the first helicopter I flew was a French-made Sud Aviation, later Aerospatiale Alouette 3. So we flew that for a while, and all I did was fly that during training, because the year I finished training, we started bringing in American equipment, Bell Hueys. We had H models, and they were almost the last H models to come off the production line at Arlington and Bell. They were built between 76 and 77. And I think they laid down only one further batch after that went to the Turkish army. So these were pretty good aircraft. They were brand new. They were in really good shape. And, in American history, of course, Huey is the iconic aircraft of the Vietnam War. So we had those. And then the ones I really liked were the Bell 212. And we bought 3 for search and rescue. And these were actually civilian models. They were civilian CAA IFR models. So they came with a complete suite of King Gold Crown avionics. The only thing we added then was a UHF radio, ARC-159, and the military transponder. So we used those for rescue. But again, at that time, it was completely British. The whole doctrine of our operations at the time were British, because they were our ex-colonial masters, and we had engaged them to set up our Air Force. So the search and rescue was very RAF-like, RAF doctrine completely. They had 2 guys in the back, 2 crewmen. They sent one guy down on the hoist, and the other guy operated the hoist from the cabin. And the equipment they used to secure the survivor was also very British. There was no American gear. Later on, I guess, because of Vietnam experience, and I might have actually written the paper for that, we got jungle penetrators, because that's what they were using in the US at the time, in Vietnam. And so we had various other bits, but it was predominantly British. As far as my military career was concerned, that was my favorite kind of flying. And when you sat search and rescue in a small country and small air force like that, essentially you cover everything: airline crashes, civilian crashes, military crashes, rescues at sea. The first rescue I ever went to was an airliner, a Malaysian Airlines airliner that had been hijacked. And the hijacker apparently overpowered the crew, because the aircraft did a dive right into the ground, killed everybody. I was at home watching TV, and the phone rings, and they want me to get back to base and get flying. And I was a junior co-pilot at the time, so I went over there, flew with one of the flight commanders. We went out there to southern Malaysia where the crash had occurred, and it was the first time I'd ever seen an aircraft crash, and there was nothing left. I think the only thing you could recognize was one of the engines sticking out of the ground. So that was pretty grim. Obviously we didn't get anybody from there. Rescue people off ships, which is really interesting. And, this was in the old days when there was no GPS. So all you did was you drew a line on the map out to the position, the last reported position, and you flew out there, with a stopwatch. And it was all VFR because there was really no airways guidance you could use. So that was very good. You went out to the approximate search area. There'd be a couple of ships, and then you'd buzz them, flying by the side to read the name, and then, oh, that's the ship, and then you'd go in and you'd pull the survivor off. So, I liked that. I liked the independence, the fact that you had to think for yourself. There was one where a Marchetti had crashed, and this Marchetti it was one of our military ones. It was almost like the one I have today. It came off the same production line at the same time. And they had gone into the water off the ocean. I think they taught basic air combat maneuvering. So he was fighting with another aircraft, and they departed. They got into spin. They never recovered. They went right into the ocean. So I had a Bell 212. I was a duty rescue pilot. I went out there, and I sent I think what we saw when we got there were two helmets floating in the water and a tip tank. So we actually recovered that. My winchman went down, a real gutsy guy, came back. By the time we got there, he only managed to recover one of the helmets. He got a whole tip tank. So that was all that was left of the aircraft. We flew the stuff, back to their squadron, left it there, and then we continued searching. Never found them. They were never found. And then there was another interesting one where there was an A4 Skyhawk from one of the other squadrons. The two of them had gone to a range, and coming back, this pilot, he had a fire warning light, and I think they might have seen flames. His wingman or his lead was actually a U.S. Navy exchange pilot. So the exchange pilot was there, and my friend punched out. He went into the water, and the other guy orbited him. And that was a very quick rescue, because the moment they went in, they scrambled us who went out there. I think he was in the water maybe 15, 20 minutes. Picked him up, took him to hospital. And then the interesting thing was the exchange pilot, the American guy, called another exchange pilot. Another American pilot was in our squadron and said, were you flying that day? And the other guy says, no, Dave Tan was flying it. Oh, the Navy pilot says, because the guy spoke real English. So, I guess, the local accent is kind of different from how I speak. So, I thought it was kind of interesting. But this friend of mine who ejected, I think 2 years ago, I met up with him again. He lives in Australia now, and he passed through here somewhere east down to Iowa, and he stopped by Milwaukee, and I met him and had lunch with him in the Harley-Davidson Museum, and, we've got pictures and all that. So I thought it's very good. The last time I saw him was more than 30 years ago, and, it was kind of wet and coming up the end of my voice. It wasn't my intention to stay in the military. I think essentially I wanted to fly. And at the time, they had this policy that if you were a Singaporean citizen, you couldn't join the airlines direct. I really didn't have much of an interest in going to be a military pilot. I think I wanted to be an airline pilot. But, that was very political, and, for one reason or other, they wouldn't let me go to the airlines. There was a direct transfer program. They said, no, you go to the big helicopter squadron, be an instructor, and then we'll think about it. So, when they talk like that, you can't trust them. So what I decided to do is I resigned. I had a 12-year commitment for training. And when I finished that, I told them I'm getting out. So I resigned. And I guess I wanted to to catch up with my education and then, see where it leads from there. I think you do need a basic education. And at the time when I went in, you didn't need a degree, you didn't need a 4-year degree to become an officer. So I decided to do that. I came over here, I went to Georgia Tech, and I got a business degree, and then I went on to grad school. I went to Emory. Did the joint JD and MBA program. I suppose if things had been different, if I had got into a good law firm, if I enjoyed the work, I probably wouldn't have continued flying or would have been a lawyer. But I really didn't like that too much. And I had a part-time job as a Falcon 50 first officer for a bank, but didn't get very many flights out of that, got a couple of flights out of that. And I ended up flying cargo. I flew cargo in Hawaii. I flew FedEx packages. FedEx would bring the packages into Honolulu and something like a DC-10, and then we'd redistribute it to the outer islands. I flew for a small company called Corporate Air out of Montana, and they had a base in Honolulu, and they flew 3 shorts 330s and a bunch of caravans, and then the packages got redistributed, and then cargo from the outer islands would come back to the Honolulu hub and move on from there. So I went for the interview for this job, and they look at my time. They said, "You've got so much time, we can make you a caravan captain, for double the pay." I didn't want to. I wanted to be a shorts FO because I needed a multi-engine time. So I stayed as an FO in shorts, and that was a lot of fun. It was a really good job, very easy. I think it was the idea of fractional aircraft ownership. And the founder of NetJets, Richard Santulli, had actually, I would say, invented that business model where you would sell equity in airframes. So the early programs, you would sell 400 hours a year in a particular airframe. And I think you could buy down to as the lowest share was either 50 or 25 hours. So it was prorated. You bought that. And I think the expectation was that, I think the contracts were 5 years. So at the end of 5 years, if you decided to dispose of the aircraft, if you could sell the aircraft for more than what you paid for it, obviously, you made money. If not, you didn't. Economically, it makes sense. I think if you fly less than 400 hours a year, I think that was the break even. If you flew more than that, you're better off buying your own airplane. If you flew 50 hours or less, you're probably better off chartering. And from there, I guess all kinds of different models have emerged on, how you buy flight time in private aircraft. And now, and I think a few years ago, our company also invented the jet card. And a jet card, I think you bought 25 hours at $250,000. It was like a phone card. You used it up. And once you used it up, it was gone. There's no equity commitment or anything. We spoke about me going to Oshkosh, and I've been going on and off. I didn't go to Oshkosh really regularly until I moved up here to the Madison area. And I've been a member of Warbirds probably since I had the airplane. And of course, in Warbirds, what you do is, before every Oshkosh, you'd register the aircraft. Then you'd bring it in, the greeters would meet you, and then you went up to the counter, checked in, get a very nice goodie bag. What's more important of all, you have 2 wristbands for a week. So I did that for a few years, and that was great. But I really didn't feel involved. So one year I asked the liaison guys, They fly bird dogs and the Stearmans, and there was even a Mohawk. And I don't know, you might know Mike Weinfurter, who has that bird dog, the orange army bird dog. So one year I flew with him, and the normal liaison warbird air shows, basically just warbird in the field. But I still felt I wasn't really involved enough, so I thought let me go ahead and get a fast card. Maybe I can fly with somebody. And the Marchetti is a bit of an orphan. I mean, you don't have your own make organization. There isn't one. So one year I flew with the North American Trainer Association. We were guys at T6s and T28s, and did a couple of flights with them. I think I did some solo. I can't remember what duel I did. And then somebody recommended the Red Star Pilot Association, and they were very good. I found that the aircraft were fairly compatible. Marchetti is a bit faster than a Yak, but essentially still doable. So I ended up doing my my fast card with them. This is very interesting. I went there. I went to a aviation law conference, and part of one of the events was they had one of the guys from a company bring in the L-39 to give rides. So I was talking to the L-39 pilot, and he had recommended Red Stars. That's how I got involved with them. And that's where I met Ski, and gave me my check ride for the fast wing card. In fact, Todd Weinmiller, who is one of the T6 guys, he normally leads for T6s, he gave me my recommendation ride, and then Ski gave me my check ride, and this was a few years ago. I think it was in 2008, I think. So it worked out very well. The Red Stars, I have this odd airplane, and the Red Stars still let me fly with them. I think one year, I got lucky. They had a B-17, and we got a fly formation with them. And usually when I fly with the Red Stars during adventure, I'm usually the slot guy, usually the last slot guy, since I've got the odd looking airplane. So that's worked out very well. We flew formation with B-17. It was very nice. My call sign at Red Stars is Quota, because here you have a bunch of white guys flying these Chinese airplanes, these CJ6s. And one day a real Chinaman shows up in an Italian airplane. So my call sign is Quota for racial hiring quotas. And of course, those guys are completely un-PC. So it worked out extremely well. They're a really good organization, great guys, good discipline. Can't say enough good things about them. I don't even know how it got started. I think I read an article on maybe AOPA Pilot, but it looks like it was back in about 2011, because that's when I first flew a trip for them. And I think it's important to say what it is. Pilots N Paws is actually an electronic ride board on the internet. So rescuers who need to move animals register as transporters, and pilots register as pilots. So what Pilots N Paws does is it puts the two together. A rescuer would go on there, and I think they have a fairly standard format for you to fill out, the weights of the dogs, where they're going, the destinations, how far the rescuer would be willing to drive, and so on. So they have their own little pro forma to fill out. And as a pilot, what you do is you specify a fix, any fix. And you also say, you're willing to fly within so many miles of this fix. And I have a 250-mile ring around Madison. So, whatever comes through that area, What happens is if you have a flight that goes through your area or cuts your ring, you get an email notification. Then there's a link you can click on and you can look at the trip and see whether you want to contribute. But I think a lot of people don't realize is that they don't pay for anything. The pilots pay for all the flying and all the expenses. And you're in return, because for a 501c3, you get to write it off on your taxes. So that's how the system works. And it's been very good. I think the fact that you have this has probably saved a lot of animals. I am up to about 350 animals total now. They're mainly dogs. I've had about 23 cats, 3 goats, and 1 bat. And the bat is the only one I never saw, because he showed up in this amphibian container that you put frogs and tortoises in. It was completely blacked out because, oh no, he's nocturnal. We can't give him any light. So for all I know, it could have been empty. But this bat came down from Minnesota. I met up with him in Milwaukee, and then he went on to Columbus, Ohio, to a wildlife rescue place. With the Marchetti, it's not really a great dog transporter, because of the layout, the sliding canopy, have more or less limited to about 50-pound dogs, because 50 pounds is the limit of a dog I can carry onto the wing and get into the back under the canopy and get them out again. There's no way I can take a 90-pound dog. It's just not going to work. With a 90-pound dog, you're probably better off with something like a Bonanza 36 or a Baron 58, where you've got twin doors and you put a ramp, and you can load the dog easily. So that's what I do. I can fly maybe 3 50-pound dogs in the back of an airplane, and I'll cruise at about 160 knots. So that's kind of a mission profile. I think with Warbirds, the basic sentiment is like everybody else. We're involved in this movement. We like to see all the airplanes being preserved and fly, for the later generations come along. There's always this debate of whether we should leave them in museums because they're too valuable to fly, or fly them. And obviously, I'm on they should be flown side. Not very many people know about the Marchetti, but I'm happy to have one up during the Warbird Air Show, so that some of the old guys who might have flown them, at least get to see one fly. Although I don't think the aircraft has kind of reached that level, rarity yet, but it's still a lot around. But maybe there are not very many being demonstrated. I was at Adventure one year, and 2 Uruguayan guys came out, and they were really interested. And the Uruguayan Air Force use it as a basic trainer, so obviously there's a link there. From a personal viewpoint, Oshkosh is like a big reunion. Some of the guys in the community. For me, it would be all the Red Star pilots. It'd be the time of year. We get to meet up. It's always good to see them. The ground crew guys, the guys who run our line, it's always the same guys. They do the yak line. They do the yak line for years. They don't disappear to T-34s or T-6s. So from that viewpoint, it's always good to see them as well. So it's really a nice little community. I think it's very good that EAA has all these various specialist areas. Ourselves, the Warbirds, the aerobatic people, the home builders, and all that. It's just wonderful. America is really wonderful because we can do this. We have the freedom to do this. I mean, in Singapore, where I came from, they try to kill general aviation. As far as they're concerned, it's only the military and the airlines. General aviation, you're probably more an annoyance than anything else. The fact that the bureaucrats have to deal with you. If they could kill it all off completely for convenience, they would do it. So, this is what makes, I think, America different from the rest of the world. um, I think this is the individualism, the individuality to do what you want to, within reason. To pursue your passions, I guess.